Do I make you uncomfortable? Maybe that's the wrong question to ask when I'm larger than life staring down at you from the big screen. But if I don't make you uncomfortable, if the church doesn't sometimes make you uncomfortable, then I'm probably not doing my job. The last few weeks we've been talking about we are the church, that we don't go to church, we don't go to an event, we don't go to a building, that's not our idea of church, that's not what church is, but that we are the church, the people, the community, the living, breathing body of Christ in the world, that we as the church show the world what God is like, that we show the world what Jesus is like, that our identity as the body of Christ, that Paul calling us the body of Christ it's a little bit more than just a metaphor, that it really is a reality. So that when when Jesus said to Paul on the Damascus Road, "Why are you persecuting me?" when Paul was persecuting the members of the church, that wasn't an exaggeration. That Jesus so closely identifies with the church, that Jesus so closely identifies with us, that we are one with Christ. And if that's true, there are times when being in this community is going to make us uncomfortable, because Jesus is always calling us to be more than what we are. Jesus is always inviting us to grow. Jesus is always inviting us to deeper faith, to deeper love, to more complete joy, to a more profound commitment to God and to one another. And being part of a church, being part of a community of believers is full of discomfort, awkwardness. And the beautiful thing is that God uses those challenges, that God uses that awkwardness, that God uses that discomfort to help us to grow into better people, to grow into more faithful disciples, to grow as lovers of one another and lovers of God. And we need to kind of embrace that reality, that there are times where it's not going to be comfortable to be here as part of the church. This passage from Peter that we read earlier, Peter is writing to the churches that are experiencing persecution, probably in Asia Minor, and he reminds them that they are the chosen people of God. They have been built up as a building, as a presence of God's intention in the world. We're called to be living stones, built up into a spiritual house, a holy priesthood. And that's a community that's completely focused on Jesus, that's focused on living that life. It's a community where we put aside our own desires, we put aside our own preferences, we put aside our own comfort zones for the sake of becoming this community that exemplifies God's love. We have to put aside what Dietrich Bonhoeffer, everybody's favorite Lutheran, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor in Germany during the time of World War II, and he was one of the main people who resisted the Nazis, who resisted Hitler, and said, no, we cannot be putting Jews in concentration camps and killing them. We have to stand against evil. And Bonhoeffer was eventually imprisoned and executed in the Flossenburg concentration camp. But Bonhoeffer, one of the things that Bonhoeffer said was, we have to give up our wish dream of church. We have to give up the idea of the perfect church, what we would consider the perfect church, and fully embrace the imperfect community of believers that God has given us. The place where we will be challenged, the place where we will be at times uncomfortable, but also the place where we will grow. And so, here, I think of our group of believers here. This community is not perfect in anybody's estimation. At least I would think that there are things that you would change if you could. Maybe it's the music. Maybe it's the preaching. Maybe it's the way we do communion. Maybe it's some of the people. You would prefer that some of the people weren't here. There's always things that we change. Maybe you don't like the color of the carpet. I don't know, but I'm sure that there's something. I'm sure that there's something that you would change if you could. The thing is, though, is those things can be opportunities for growth for us, for growth as Christians, for growth as people in our relationships to one another. I think back to a few years ago. I guess it's quite a few years ago now, when we first got the drum set here. And there was one Sunday where we had a guest preacher, and the preacher was talking about the music and how happy he was, how vibrant the music was. And he was at that time, we actually had a teenager who was playing the drums at that time. And the preacher was talking about how happy that this young man could come and play the drums and be part of the worship experience. And there were some people then, as I imagine some people now, who the drums are not their favorite thing as part of worship. And this one person said to me after that worship service, okay, I get it. I don't like the drums. I'll never like the drums. But I guess if that gets that young man here and worshiping with us, and maybe speaks to some other people too, it's good that we have the drums. That's an example of growing as believers. That we look around and we say, maybe this isn't the way that I do it. Maybe this isn't my preference. But if it's something that builds up other people in the body of Christ, let's do it. Because the goal is that we all get closer to Jesus. The goal is that we worship together. The goal is that we all grow together. And some things are going to help you grow. That might not be exactly what helps me grow, but we have some variety. We have some sharing. We have some ability to say, that might not be my thing, but if it helps you, let's still do it, because what's important is that we're all on the path toward discipleship, that we're all on the path toward deeper connection to God. And see, that's, in our culture, that's a counter-cultural thing. In our culture, we're told you get what you want. And if you don't get what you want, then you go someplace else. If it's not exactly the way you like it, well, then don't go to that restaurant anymore. If it's not exactly the show that you would like, then don't go to that source of entertainment anymore. If you don't like it, then forget about it. But that's not the church. The church is really supposed to make us uncomfortable. I mean, if you look at what Jesus says, Jesus in John's gospel today, Jesus is telling the crowd that following him requires dying to ourselves. And there are many places where Jesus says that we have to die to ourselves, die to our own interests, die to our own desires, so that we could be open to serving others. And Jesus says, if we love the things that make us comfortable above everything else, we're going to miss out. And it's not just that we're going to miss out on the world to come, but we're going to miss out in this life too, because we'll miss out on the joy and the satisfaction of being a blessing to others, of being able to say, yes, we can be a blessing to one another. Following Jesus is not the magic ticket to happiness in every aspect of life. We all know that. But sometimes we forget because the world is so tumultuous. The world is so confusing. The world is so broken. There's so much evil in the world that sometimes we just hope, can't I just come to worship? Can't I just be part of my church community to get comforted? And there is certainly a place for that. And we do that. We do that here. That that we share the message of God's comfort. We share the message of God's love. We share the message that each and every one of us is precious and valued in God's sight. But if we're not also challenging one another, if we're not also, in the words of a couple of weeks ago, spurring one another, provoking one another to good works, in the words of the letter to the Hebrews, then we're missing something about being the church. The church isn't just the place where we're comforted. It's also the place that we're challenged. Because if we're not challenged, then we're not going to grow. And don't we all, no matter how young or how old we are, don't we all want to grow? Don't we all want to have a better life and be a better person and be a better disciple and experience more of God's love and more love for God, experience more love from one another and experience more love to others? That doesn't happen without a little bit of discomfort, without a little bit of challenge. And so that's what the church is about. It's not just about staying the same, not just about saying that everything's okay. It's about saying that God is on the move and he is challenging us to move into God's preferred future for us. And sometimes that's going to be uncomfortable. Thanks be to God.